Today, I would like to talk about the problems of the Chinese government from the relationship between China and Hong Kong. First, let us take a quick look at China and Hong Kong. 1839, the Fayest Opium War broke out with Britain. In 1841, British troops occupied Hong Kong Island. In 1842, Qing lost to England. Hong Kong Island ceded to Britain under the Treaty of Nanking. Since then, Hong Kong has become a British colonial rule. In 1856, the Second Opium War began with Britain and France. In 1860, the Second Opium War ended. Qing lost to England and France. Kowloon Peninsula was also ceded to Britain under the Convention of Peking. In 1865, the British-owned Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation Limited was founded. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation is a national bank that plays a part in British colonial policy. In 1898, Britain leased the New Territories area for 99 years. Hong Kong Island, Kowloon Peninsula, and New Territories became British colonies. At the beginning of the 20th century, capital was invested from the United Kingdom, and Hong Kong developed significantly as a free trade port and became a financial center in Asia. In 1911, Xinhai Revolution took place. Xinhai Revolution was a republican revolution, and the Qing dynasty was destroyed. The Republic of China was established and became the first republic in Asia. In 1919, as nationalism increased, the Chinese Nationalist Party was formed mainly by Sun Yat-sen. In 1920, the Chinese Communist Party was formed. Later, the Chinese Communist Party became a political party that suffered many people by committing numerous violations of international law and human rights. For example, the suppression of the Tibetan people, support for the dictatorship, the construction of artificial islands claiming sovereignty over the South China Sea, and the spread of infectious diseases such as SARS, MERS, and COVID-19 all over the world. In 1937, the Sino-Japanese War began. From 1941 to 1945, the Pacific War began. Hong Kong was occupied by Japanese troops in this war. In 1945, Japan's defeat brought Hong Kong back under British rule. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was founded. Chinese Nationalist Party government led by Chiang Kai-shek moved to Taiwan. In 1984, Sino-British Joint Declaration was issued. Following this statement, the United Kingdom transferred Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China on July 1, 1997. Socialism in mainland China does not apply to Hong Kong, and the traditional capitalist system and lifestyle will be maintained for 50 years after the return. And one country, two systems is guaranteed. In 1989, the Tiananmen massacre occurred. Students seeking democracy and political and economic freedom protested at Tiananmen Square. The Chinese Communist Party sent tanks and soldiers to the plaza where demonstrators gathered, fired at students and killed hundreds of people. According to a diplomatic document released in the United Kingdom in 2017, Chinese troops killed at least 10,000 people. To curb this incident, the Chinese government has introduced an anti-Japanese policy. China is trying to erase the slaughter from history. Words and voice, image recognition technology and machine learning, and tens of thousands of sensors will remove everything related to the Tiananmen Square incident. In 1990, the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region was enacted. China must not implement socialist institutions and policies in Hong Kong under one country, two systems, allowing freedom of speech, the press, and protests, maintaining the current capitalist system and lifestyle for 50 years. Independent jurisdiction is given. Restricted rights were recognized in mainland China, such as the above. In 1997, Hong Kong returned to China. One country, two systems has started, in which two different systems, socialism and capitalism, coexist in one country. In 2014, an umbrella movement took place in Hong Kong. Regarding the 2017 Hong Kong chief executive election, the Chinese central government has decided on an election method that virtually eliminates pro-democracy candidates. Tens of thousands of students and citizens protesting this electoral system occupied the downtown area. In 2019, the Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019 was submitted in Hong Kong. The law could lead to arbitrary detention and unfair trials by China. From 2019 to 2020, there was a large-scale democratization protest in Hong Kong. Originally, the protest activity was aimed at opposition to the revised bill for the fugitive offenders, but from around June 2019, it became a protest activity aimed at achieving the 5 demands. What are the 5 demands? Complete withdrawal of the Fugitive Ordinance Amendment. Realization of universal suffrage. Establishment of an independent investigation committee. Withdrawal of arrest for arrested protesters. Cancellation of recognizing democratization demonstration as riot. In 2020, the Hong Kong national security law came into force, and Hong Kong lost many irreplaceable things. The human rights of Hong Kong citizens are deprived. Hong Kong citizens lose their freedom and Hong Kong is legally controlled by China. The independence of the judiciary is lost. That is, the Chinese government can conveniently interpret the law and punish innocent people. This law may violate international law. Article 20 of the Crime of Separatism states that a person who organizes, plans, commits or participates in any of the following acts, whether or not by force or threat of force, with a view to committing secession or undermining national unification shall be guilty of an offense. Isn't it an international violation to apply the national division crime even when not using force? Article 22 of the Crime of Overthrowing the State is written as follows. A person who organizes, plans, commits or participates in any of the following acts by force or threat of force or other unlawful means with a view to subverting the state power shall be guilty of an offense. International human rights law and the United Nations Covenant on Human Rights are applied only after the occurrence of force. However, under Articles 20 and 22 of the Hong Kong National Security Law, even peaceful protesters could be arrested, depending on the interpretation of the Chinese government. 2047, the deadline for termination of one country, two systems will come. However, the Hong Kong National Security Law ended the one country, two systems about 30 years ahead of schedule. The one country, two systems is an international commitment when Hong Kong is returned from the United Kingdom to China, and is also specified in the Hong Kong Basic Law, which is the Constitution of Hong Kong. So what's the problem with the Chinese government's intervention in Hong Kong? The first issue is the chief executive of Hong Kong. The head of the Hong Kong government, the chief executive of Hong Kong, is not elected in democratic universal suffrage by Hong Kong citizens, but in unfair and restrictive elections. On November 9, 2019, the Chinese government announced a policy that only those who are loyal to China can become chief executive of Hong Kong. In other words, Hong Kong's chief executive is a mere figurehead, and a yes man who just follows what the Chinese government said. The second problem is the collapse of one country, two systems. For 50 years after Hong Kong was returned from Britain to China, two systems, communism and capitalism, should have been coexist in one country. However, the Chinese government has blocked the democratization of Hong Kong and suppressed the statements of Hong Kong people who oppose the Chinese government. Democratization from within Hong Kong has become extremely difficult. The Chinese government used force against demonstrators seeking democracy and freedom in the Tiananmen Square incident, resulting in numerous casualties. The Chinese government is still oppressing and slaughtering the Tibetan, ethnic minority in China. Actively violating human rights is the history and present of the Chinese government. Countries around the world should increase criticism and pressure on the Chinese government and consider countries that do business with China as countries that admit human rights abuses. Countries around the world must change their relations with China. The third issue is the strengthening of textbook management in Hong Kong. Hong Kong education authorities who received the intention of Xi Jinping of China to emphasize the patriotic education are tightening control over Hong Kong textbooks. In this year's textbook certification, several publishers received requests for amendments from Chinese authorities, with the following changes. Hong Kong has a mechanism of separation of powers. Emphasis on individual freedom, rights, and property guarantees. Photographs about democratization movements such as the Rain Umbrella movement, etc. Regarding the protest demonstration against the government in 2019. The description that the police banned the demonstration violated the freedom of the citizens, and partly because the government did not respond to the demands of the citizens regarding economics, politics and life such. However, instead, a statement was added that if you commit an illegal act in the demonstration, you will be liable for the related criminal charges. Hong Kong is a part of China, but the education system is different under one country, two systems. In Hong Kong, liberal studies education was a compulsory subject in high school. Liberal studies education is to learn a wide range of social issues and develop a critical spirit and diverse perspectives. The Chinese government, which implements patriotic education, strongly opposed the common-sense education that is said to have cultivated the democratic thinking of young people, and enforced the national security law in June. The Chinese government is tightening its squeeze on education. The national security law stipulates that it will strengthen publicity, guidance, supervision and control for school. In June, the Hong Kong authorities also enforced the National Anthem Ordinance, which requires national anthems to be sung in educational settings. Xi Jinping takes advantage of education to penetrate the concept of parent Chinese government, anti-democratic, will intend to dominate and brainwash the Hong Kong citizens. The fourth issue is the national security law. The national security law has the following problems. The most dangerous of the above problems are possible violation of international law and ambiguous expression and retroactive application. First of all, I would like to talk about possibility of violating international law. Suspected violations of international law are Article 20 on the crime of committing secession and Article 22 on the crime of overthrowing the national government. Under Articles 20 and 22 of the Hong Kong National Security Law, even peaceful protesters could be arrested, depending on the interpretation of the Chinese government. International human rights law and the International Bill of Human Rights are applied only when force is generated. Isn't it a violation of international law to be arrested for peaceful protests without the use of force? The Sino-British Joint Declaration is registered with the United Nations and is legally binding under international treaties. On June 9, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi insisted on non-intervention in domestic affairs regarding the Hong Kong issue. In June 2017, a spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China stated that the Sino-British Joint Declaration was a historical document and has no practical significance and that it was virtually invalid. These statements by the Chinese government point out that the agreement with China is meaningless and that all the promises made may be invalidated. It will be impossible to establish diplomatic relations with China, such as trade and transportation. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi argued that it was unfounded criticism against the criticism that the guarantee of one country, two systems specified in the Sino-British Joint Declaration would not be protected by the national security law. However, the chief executive of Hong Kong will be appointed under the initiative of the Chinese government. The commissioner of the Hong Kong Police Force, which oversees the Hong Kong Police Force, will be appointed as the chief executive of Hong Kong. In addition, the Chinese government will create a national security department within the Hong Kong police force to accept personnel from China. And the chief of the Hong Kong Police Force's National Security Department is appointed by the Chief Executive of Hong Kong. At the time of his inauguration, he must uphold the basic law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China and be loyal to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. The Chief Justice of the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal and the Chief Justice of the Hong Kong High Court are appointed by the Chief Executive of Hong Kong, approved by the Legislative Council, and appointed by the Standing Committee of the National People's Republic of China. As you can see from this figure, it cannot be said that the one country, two systems system is being protected in China and Hong Kong. Next, I would like to talk about Hong Kong democracy activist Agnes Chow-Ting. On August 10, Agnes was arrested on suspicion of violating the national security law. In addition to Agnes, 10 people including Jimmy Lai Chi-ying, the founder of Hong Kong newspaper Apple Daily, which is known for its critical tone against China, were also arrested. Affected by growing up in a politically indifferent Catholic family, Agnes began to learn compassion for those in need of help in vulnerable positions and participate in social movements. However, in 2012, there was a protest with more than 90,000 people against the implementation of national education in public schools, which included praise for the Chinese Communist Party. Agnes, then 15 years old, also joined the protest and met Joshua Wong, a teenage democratic activist of his generation. As a result of this large-scale protest, the policy to make national education mandatory was postponed. 2 years later, in 2014, Joshua started the anti-government demonstration umbrella movement by students as the founder, and Agnes also participated. Hong Kong students protested that the Chinese government had decided on an electoral system that would virtually eliminate pro-democracy candidates. Protesters used umbrellas to counter the police trying to eliminate them with tear gas and tear spray. The protests lasted for 79 days. The umbrella movement was peaceful, but failed as the Chinese government suppressed the demands of the demonstrators by force and pressure. However, there have been some successes in the Rain umbrella movement. One of its successes is the attention of the international community. The Chinese government are eager to silence the young pro-democracy activists who are in the way of the Chinese Communist Party. On the night of August 10, Agnes was handcuffed by the staff of the National Security Agency, a security agency specializing in national security law, which was newly established in Hong Kong, and was taken from her home. She was arrested on suspicion of collusion with foreign powers, which the national security law provides for criminal penalties. However, the police have not announced why Agnes was arrested for violating the law and what specifically is collusion with foreign powers. One of the evidences Agnes was shown to the police when she was arrested was an ad for the Hong Kong democratization movement that she published in a Japanese newspaper last year. On June 15, the Deputy Chief of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office of the State Council of the People's Republic of China, government, said that the Hong Kong national security law would not retroactively punish people. However, if Agnes was arrested for an opinion advertisement that she took out last year, it is clear that the national security law applied retroactively. If the Chinese government does not comply with the law, China will be considered a rogue state. In addition, many Chinese laws are ambiguous and can be interpreted in various ways, and can be arrested for no reason or evidence. Isn't Chinese law an excuse for human rights violations, rather than a correctly applied law? If the Chinese government claims their own actions are correct, it should openly disclose the reasons and evidence for Agnes' arrest. Currently, Agnes is 23 years old. If you are 23 years old, you probably want to enjoy various things such as traveling, going out to play, and eating with friends. The freedom and dignity of the people of Hong Kong now and in the future are being deprived of the Chinese government. There is a limit to the power of one person. In order to save the people of Hong Kong, they need support from countries all over the world to Hong Kong in strict response to China. The Chinese government is trying to silence the criticisms of the Chinese government by people around the world, especially in Hong Kong, by means of sneaky means using armed force, education and law. China is a selfish country that does not keep promises between nations. Disturbs the international order. Arbitrarily distorts the interpretation of the law, and tries to justify China's behavior. China, which afflicts many and repeatedly violates human rights, should be excluded from the international community. The time has come for the world to impose economic sanctions on China and break diplomatic relations with China. Everyone, let's change our relationship with China.